Hi everyone, and welcome to our last video on the lymphatic system, and what I think is probably the most interesting and most important video of this lecture series. In this video, we're going to review antibodies, how they're produced, what they're for, how vaccinations work, and then we'll get into some autoimmune disorders. So let's get started. Now, at the end of the last video, we were looking at this Y-shaped molecule called an antibody. And we discussed how on the tips of the Ys, we have these antigen binding sites. These are called variable regions on an actual antibody, and on the variable region is where the antigen binding site is located, if we want to be like super specific. But this is where those antigens, the foreign proteins, are going to bind. Now, there are 5 different types of immunoglobulins, which is type of antibody. IgA, IgM, IgG, IgD, and IgE. In our class, we're only focused on IgG and IgM because they're predominantly the most important ones in terms of a regular sort of immune response. IgD, IgA, and IgE are involved in other aspects of your immune system, which you'll learn more about if you head to physiology. So we've actually talked about the IgM antibodies before when we were going through blood typing and how certain blood types have antibodies against other blood types. Those are IgM types of immunoglobulins. And then IgG is the most common one that we'll be talking about in terms of your response to an infection. So, where do these guys come from? Well, here's the interesting thing. On your B cells, if we look at our little B cell here, kind of got cut off, but there is an antibody-shaped molecule on a B cell. This antibody-shaped molecule is called a B cell receptor, and each B cell has a different receptor. So it can, through sheer quantity, hopefully, be able to identify a pathogen. If something binds to the B cell receptor, it gets turned on. And what that does is it triggers a series of rapid divisions into 2 different populations. One population of that B cell will become what's called a plasma cell. Plasma cells are what make antibodies. B cells don't make antibodies. B cells make plasma cells, which make antibodies. The other population of cells that are formed are B cells, memory B cells. These are going to be basically clones of that original cell whose receptor matches the antigen. These are important in our immunological memory. So the plasma cells are for the here and now. They're going to produce all those antibodies, which we'll talk about how those help get rid of the pathogen. And the memory B cells are for our immunological memory, for the future. So they're going to be floating around in your bloodstream or in your lymph nodes or in your spleen, wherever they need to be. And if they bind to something that they've seen before, it's going to trigger a different type of response. So how do these antibodies work? I like to teach my students that antibodies always have a plan. They can do 4 different things. First, they can do what's called precipitation. This is where you take something that's mixed in a solution and that sediments to the bottom. So antibodies can bind to these pathogens and get them to clump together outside of the fluid they're in, like in your bloodstream or your tissue fluid. And so it kind of clumps everything together, making it easier for your white blood cells to gobble them up, okay? The other thing they can do is lysis. We've talked about lysis before when we were discussing osmosis and tenicities, but lysis just means to burst, like we saw with the complement system. Remember when we talked about complement, I said there was a couple of different ways that we could trigger it. One of those ways is where antibodies trigger the complement system. So there is a process where this antibody will basically bind to the bacteria and trigger those proteins to form the drill. They drill through the cell wall and then boom, the bacteria bursts. Another thing that your antibodies can do is they can make whatever is making you sick look more attractive to phagocytes. So they bind to, we'll just use bacteria for example, and as the bacteria is floating around and it comes into contact with a white blood cell, the white blood cell goes, ooh, that looks nice. It's like the idea of putting just a steak on a plate versus like a steak with some garlic butter and some fries and some like creamed corn. Like, which plate are you going to go for more, right? The one that has all the accoutrement. And the last thing it does is actually more involved with toxins. So some of the bacteria that we can encounter produce toxins, and those are what actually make you sick, not so much the bacteria. If you head to microbiology, you will learn all about it there. But in this case, antibodies can actually bind to those toxins and neutralize them, which basically means it makes them unable to do the thing that they were going to do. So we can clump our cells, our cells, our bacteria cells. We can cause them to rupture. We can make whatever the pathogen is looks more delicious, or we can neutralize a toxin. So that is what your antibodies do to help in your immune response. Now, as I mentioned, the other population of cells that are cloned when something binds to a B cell receptor are your memory cells, and they're responsible for immunological memory. Now, this is the memory of your body to a specific pathogen, so a specific virus or a specific bacteria. If we look at this graph, and I apologize that my head is kind of covering half of it, this is your first response. We call this the primary response. This is the first time you're ever exposed to a pathogen. You're exposed here on day 0, and you'll notice it takes almost a week for IgM antibodies to be produced and almost 2 weeks for IgG antibodies to be produced. And then you kind of go back down. So it takes a while for your body to create these immunological attack cells and memory cells. And so you're sicker longer, and you're more sick the first time you encounter a pathogen. If you're unlucky enough to catch it again, you'll notice that here's where we get sick, and almost immediately IgG and IgM antibodies skyrocket. So this is the instance where you may feel a little under the weather, but not nearly to the same degree you did the first time you had it. Either you're less sick, or you're less sick for a shorter period of time, or you may not even know that you're sick. So that's the importance of these immunological memory cells. And this right here, this primary response and secondary response, is the basis for vaccination. So vaccines are not medications, but basically they are given to you to help you have that secondary immune response, so you don't have to catch it the first time. Oftentimes these vaccines that we have are for diseases that if you catch it, it can kill you or it can debilitate you. So for example, we often take for granted the flu vaccine. You can die from the flu. Measles is a horrific disease. Not only can it cause blindness, it wipes out your immune system, so any immunological memory that you had, gone. And years or decades later, you could develop a very serious and debilitating brain condition that basically renders you bedridden. So rather than have that happen, we have vaccinations that introduce your body either to the whole microbe, parts of the microbe, or an altered microbe, so your body can see it, have that sort of lessened reaction in terms of like you're not getting sick, like you're not getting polio to have a memory of polio, but you're having that inflammatory reaction to build the memory response. Now, like I said, there's a bunch of different types of vaccines. Some of them you're injected with the microbe, the actual microbe, but it's dead. So it can't hurt you, it can't cause you any sickness or anything like that. That is very common for the flu shot. You're often infected with the dead flu virus, or usually a concoction of 3 or 4 trivalent or quadrivalent to help protect us for the flu season. The polio vaccine is another example of a killed microbe. So the multiple injections you have for your polio vaccines, for your early childhood vaccination schedule, they are dead. Polio, dead. Okay. For those of you who don't know, polio is a very debilitating disease. My uncle has it. He caught it when he was younger, back when he's much older, so back in the 50s. And it basically affects your ability to move. So it's called poliomyelitis. So it causes inflammation of nerves and muscles, and it is very debilitating. We also have a type of vaccination called an attenuated vaccine, where the microbe is alive, but we have altered it so it's not as strong as it used to be. So it can't cause as bad of a reaction. How we do this is we grow it in cell culture or animals so that it basically gets kind of tired after a while. It's like if you ran a lap around the track, the first lap, you're going strong. But as you continue to have to keep running, you're going to get tired. So examples of this would be the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, as well as the nasal flu spray. So you're going to have more of a reaction. Oftentimes you'll have more redness and localized swelling, but it's still better than getting the actual disease. Now, do vaccinations come with side effects? Absolutely. Everything has a side effect to it. And are these going to be 100% efficacious, meaning they are effective 100% of the time? No, because nothing is 100% effective. So there are always people that are going to have a stronger reaction. They might, instead of just having a sore arm, they might be in bed all day. You will also have what are called breakthrough infections, which are, fairly low, but they are people who got the vaccination but still caught the disease. But that is, again, a very low percentage compared to how many people are protected. So for example, if you have both doses of your MMR vaccine, you are about 97% protected from measles. And measles, again, is very dangerous, not simply because it has a high R0, which means one person can transmit the virus to between 12 and 15 people, but it also lives on surfaces and in the air for up to 2 hours. So it's an incredibly contagious disease. The more people that are vaccinated, the more protected the population is. So you don't actually get vaccinated to protect yourself. You're getting vaccinated to protect those around you who can't be vaccinated. And this idea is referred to as herd immunity. And I have a video here you guys can watch about it. But basically, over here we have 3 different people. Blue are people that are healthy but not immunized. Yellow are immunized and healthy. And red are not immunized and sick. So if no one in the population is immunized and we have a couple people get the infection, it's going to spread like wildfire. This is what we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic. No one had been introduced to this or seen it before in terms of memory from our immune system. So it spread very rapidly, and the earlier strains were very, very deadly. Now, if some people are vaccinated in the population, very few here, right? We only see about 6 people vaccinated in this population, you're still going to have quite a bit of spread. We don't have a shield yet really built to protect everyone. But this is what we're aiming for. Everyone that can get vaccinated should get vaccinated, because these 4 blue people here are immunocompromised, or they're on chemotherapy, or they were born without an immune system and they can't be vaccinated, or they're allergic to the contents like egg or other things within the vaccine that they cannot take it. We have everyone in the population that can get vaccinated so those people are as protected as possible. That is the idea behind vaccination. It is not a selfish act. It is for the betterment of the community. So that is how vaccines work, both sort of the injections as well as the idea of how we protect everyone in society. Now, in terms of adaptive immune response, we have 2 ways our body responds to it. So we have active and passive immunity. Active immunity is where you actually are building memory cells. So this occurs either when you get the infection or you have a vaccination. Your body sees the antigens, it sees the microbe, it makes those memory cells, and you have a very long life of protection. Passive immunity is where you do not make memory cells. So this is where you're going to be getting those antibodies either through like medications. I know for COVID-19 and other diseases, we can give you these sort of immune proteins and antibodies to help protect and kill whatever is attacking your body, but you're never making the immune cells themselves. The most common example of passive immunity is breast milk. So when a woman gives birth, if she's able to and she's breastfeeding, her immune cells, her antibodies, are being transmitted into the child. So as long as they're breastfeeding, they'll have some level of the same protection as mom. However, once that stops, they no longer have that protection. So until they get their vaccinations or catch something, they won't make memory cells. So active immunity is what we want with like vaccination or unfortunately getting the disease, because you get the memory and you're protected longer. Passive immunity helps you in the moment, but it won't protect you for the long run. So let's do a quick overview, and I have a video here you guys can watch to kind of, again, go through everything. Our first line of defense are our physical and chemical barriers, so our skin, mucous membranes, sweat, things like that. If that penetrates our first line of defenses, we have our secondary line of defenses. So those are our white blood cells, interferon, complement system, inflammation, and fever. If those don't work, we have adaptive immunity, T cells, B cells, all of that to hopefully finally nip the disease in the bud. And again, obviously, if those fail, you fail. So that is our immune system and responses. The last thing I want to talk about in this chapter are autoimmune diseases. So our bodies aren't perfect, and sometimes we react poorly or incorrectly to certain things. So for example, when you have allergies, it's your body overreacting to a non-harmful protein. So your body thinks that pollen that you're breathing in is a very, very bad virus. And so that's where you start getting the wheezing and the runny nose and the itchy eyes. Is because your immune system is reacting incorrectly. Same thing occurs with autoimmune disorders. This is where, for one reason or another, we're not really entirely sure for all of the immune disorders, but your body starts to look at certain populations of cells within it as bad. And so you are going to be attacking your own organs. So some common autoimmune disorders we have are lupus, which is sort of a systemic autoimmune disorder. We have rheumatoid arthritis, which I'll show you pictures of later. It affects your joints. Type 1 diabetes is another autoimmune disorder, as well as Graves' disease. Now, these disorders are treated with a plethora of medications, and for some of them, we use things called steroids. Steroid medications like prednisone are used to help reduce the inflammatory process. So for people that have things like rheumatoid arthritis, it reduces that swelling to help at least make movement of your joints a little bit easier. So here we can see this is all of the things that lupus can affect. That's why I said it's a systemic autoimmune disorder. It can affect your kidneys, your lungs, your mouth, your skin. And this right here is an example of the effects of rheumatoid arthritis. It causes really painful joint swelling, and you basically can't move your fingers. Okay. If you guys have any questions about different autoimmune disorders or anything about this chapter, feel free to shoot me an email, post it on Padlet, whatever you guys would like. Hope you had a great time, and I'll see you in the next chapter.